Hello everyone, please mute yourself when you come in. Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you all for coming today. So there's an announcement that I would like to make. I hope all of you have seen I've seen my message in your email, those that submitted their coursework. So I guess some people were asking me what they are supposed to do with the document. We will be reviewing all your policy documents this week, and we'll be doing it on as a Google document, not like on your phone. Please, can you hear me? Please, when you are joining me, please mute yourself. So we'll be editing it in as a Google document. So I just added you to the Google document so that you can be seeing any changes we are making on them. And any changes or any corrections, we'll be making comments on your some parts that's having mistakes, one or two parts. It's just similar to the way the other one was that we shared across. But this time around, you'll be able to make changes to the document. Please, and I also want to make clear, when you download the documents back to your phone, you cannot edit, you can't edit. So you have to edit it directly from Google. I don't know how to explain it. From the Google document, you have to make any changes there. So if there's any part you wanted to add, you can still add it that way. If there is any changes, like if we make a comment that I should edit this particular part, then you're also going to edit it directly from the document. Just it's not like different people are working on one single document. Let me just put it that way. So, and that was why I added all the correspondence, all the people that submitted for your group. So if I make a changes, then you discuss it with your group and you make the changes. That's just how it's supposed to be. So, and when the deadline reaches, what I will do is that I'll remove you from the, what will I say? I'll remove you from the Google document, so you won't be able to edit it again. So this is just like a period for editing. We'll be adding corrections and everything. So just be checking the documents. I'll make sure in such a way that when somebody makes any correction, you will see the notification in your email, or so that you can go there and check it. I hope it is clear.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So, I don't know if Daniel is here.
Yes, I'm here. Hello, Joshua. I'm with you.
Okay, sorry, I was looking for you.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, sorry, please. Sorry about that. I'm coming. Can you unmute yourself again so that I can find you? Daniel, can you hear me?
yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. So I think you'll be in charge of the attendance, right? Daniel, can you hear me? Some people say they didn't get what I just said. Daniel, your voice is cracking. I can't hear you. It's cracking.
Sorry, I had network glitch. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm going to share the attendance for a specified amount of minutes for at most 15 minutes. And I won't tell you the time I'm going to share it anyway. So you have to be online so that you can be able to sign in. Similar thing goes for the sign out session. I'm also going to send the for the sign out at a specific time. At most 15 minutes. It might be less than that, but at most 15 minutes. And after that, no other attendance will be sent. And please ensure you sign in and sign out, not all. Because if you signed, like if you check from the last attendance I sent, for those that signed either in or out, I put no, except you had other issues surrounding why you could not sign in that validated, then you can report to me immediately after the session. Then we can address it. If not, ensure you sign in and sign out, please. Thank you.
And also, I like to, those watching on YouTube currently, you'll be sending the link to Telegram also. So you also be like, just check Telegram. You also be sending it on Telegram, so you can just use that as where you get the link. You might have difficulty writing your names in the chat and all those stuff. So go to Telegram, you'll find the link there. So, and sorry, some people were saying they don't still understand. So I understand. I sent an email to each and every those that submitted, like the email that they used to submit. I added them to a Google document. It doesn't mean that I just added them to a Google document. So it notified them in their email that you have been added, like I've shared it together with you. So that means you have been given and that you'll be able to edit the Google document. You'll be able to edit the Google document. So, and now what happens is that we'll be doing the review this week, like throughout this week, we'll be doing the review. So you'll be checking the Google document and be seeing the comments that we are making in the Google document. Then you'll be making the changes. So, and that was the reason why I say you should keep on checking your keep on checking the document so that you'll be seeing the changes that we are making. And you can't make the changes like you are not supposed to download it to your phone and edit it. You are supposed to edit it directly from there. If you get me, you're supposed to edit it directly from there, from Google Doc. So it's quite a very simple process. If you don't understand again, just go on YouTube and search for how to use Google Document. It's a very simple process. It's not something hard. You can learn it in 5 minutes. So you just be using Google Documents to make any changes. I think our trainer for today is here. I don't know where she is. I just hope that is clear.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you so much, Marie Claire, for coming. Please, everyone should mute yourself, please. Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself.
I'm kindly requesting if you could give me access to share my screen for the slides that I prepared.
I didn't hear you.
No, I think I'm okay. I wasn't able to share my screen, but now it should be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we are okay. Just kindly requesting if we could mute ourselves as we join the call. I know when we join the call, we are all automatically on unmute. But thank you so much for having me, NiMSA. Always a pleasure interacting with you guys. It's been a while since I've been engaging with IFMSA and NMOs, but I always hold IFMSA, NMO, and NIMSA, especially dear to heart. I think I still have my NIMSA lapel pin somewhere in my belongings, which I got from one of the IFMSA ARMs. But today I'm your facilitator. My name is Marie-Claire Wangare. I am a medical, I think for you guys, you'll call it a senior house officer. Generally a general practitioner. So I'm a general practitioner based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm currently working in project management with a bit of experience in policy, especially on matters to do with monitoring and evaluation. Generally monitoring and evaluation, and also now policy progress and evaluation. So I was humbled by the invitation by your standing committee officials, Joshua and the rest of the team, to get this topic. I will give you a warning that this topic is just to make it easier for you or have the basic components of progress and monitoring of a policy, but the best way you can learn progress and monitoring of a policy is to actually do it, even if it's on like an IFMSA policy or a NiMSA policy, if you have NiMSA policies. That way it's easier to apply all that you learn, because there are various models of monitoring and evaluation, and we will go through some of the common ones today. So I think I'm pretty sure as you are going through this training cycle, you've gone through this particular, I'll call it flowchart on the policy life cycle. So a policy life cycle, I'll just go through it so that we can understand where we are at today. So you start by formulating it because you have an idea in mind and you want to put it down on paper and you want to have tangible steps. And now you'll have this policy in your idea and you'll formulate it. And then you will, depending on your organization structure, you will adopt it. And then once you adopt it, you get into the interesting part of implementing this particular policy. And then finally, you will then go into evaluating the policy, which is where we are at today. Sorry, please mute yourself. And then now from what you evaluate, now that's when you will decide, are you going to maintain the policy as it is, or are you going to make amendments? And if, for those of you who've been in IFMSA, I think you normally see that after a particular timeline, they have a policy review or update, because things change in the public health sphere, in the global health sphere. So you can never have a policy that was written 100 years ago still being the policy you're using today. It can have the same name, it can have the same key components, but you always need to update it as per the current trends. And that's why it's so important for you to evaluate so that you know now what you're maintaining in your policy. And sometimes policies are even rewritten afresh. So you can go from having a policy on, a good example I'll give you is people who had policies on Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, updated their policies now to reflect the current trend, which was SDGs, when we went to the SDGs. And I'm sure now when we get to 2030 and we evaluate the SDGs, there'll be possibly a new framework of us thinking about things. And that's just how the policy life cycle is. It's dynamic, and that's why you'll have these arrows pointing to and fro each other, because it's not a continuous loop. Sometimes you might adopt a policy and then decide to go into your maintenance and just reflect on it after implementing. Or as you evaluate, each time you evaluate, let's say your policy is 3 years, in the process of those 3 years, you might decide to amend a particular clause in your policy or even amend it totally. So it's not a definite loop. It has interchangeable parts of the loop, but this is a simplified way to go about it. And I think now today you're probably asking yourself, why are we doing this topic on monitoring of a policy and the progress of a policy? And it's basically a process by which stakeholders now assess the policies, either singular or plural, to ensure that whatever has been developed, whatever has been adopted and enacted and implemented has been as it has been as what has been written. I think the common practice in medicine is what's not written is not done. And policies is a good way of putting to paper what you would like to do in regards to a particular field. So if it is reproductive health and you have your various key subfields of reproductive health in a policy, when you monitor your policy should have key segments, which I'll bring up. And those key segments are what now you monitor to see whether you've gotten there. If you say, for example, I'll use reproductive health since I began on that train. If you say for your SCORA policy on, let's say, giving access to reproductive health education in Nigeria, if you say a deliverable is having sessions in all NiMSA chapters, and then you go down and you further specify that when you're doing it in each NiMSA chapter, you aim to reach probably 10 medical students. Those are the things now that you need to monitor. But then also, as you sometimes get into the nitty-gritties of defining your policies and your deliverables, sometimes too much of a specification is dangerous, and I'll bring to highlight why. But the main steps are just these 5. You look at the quality of your policy environment. So you appraise it as trying not to be biased. So you're doing it with an open mind. And then you gauge the level and the quality of the stakeholder engagement in all levels. So your stakeholders who may be giving you a financial support, to those ones who give you technical support, to even the people who you are targeting, that is a stakeholder, to even the people who will be benefiting from this policy, like even the people in this workshop. So you gauge them and you have your mapping of the stakeholders and what the stakeholder should benefit from whatever policy document you have. And then now you document the progress of the policy. If you're looking at it from a legislative point, let's say in NiMSA, you will now also document how this policy falls into play with the work NiMSA is doing in a national and an international level. And then finally, you put them into practice. And sometimes, or not even sometimes, many a times, putting policies into practice has an element of financing, and it's not just financing of money, but financing of even in-kind support. So you might, let's give I go back to my example of a SCORA-based policy. You might have gotten the technical support of UNFPA. They might not have given you money to write, to help you when you are drafting the policy, but maybe they proofread it and they told you to amend it to XYZ to fit into what they have written in their overall policies on reproductive health education, or even you get the support of your Ministry of Health, Reproductive Health Department. And they tell you when you're drafting your NiMSA policy, this is what we have nationally, and you can try align to that. So those are some of the things that you need to put into mind, 1, in your stakeholder engagement, and then 2, when you're practicing your policies. You don't want a policy that is out of touch with what is on the ground. And that happens in policy making, because sometimes the essence of a policy is to guide you to where you want to go and what you want to do to get there. But sometimes we focus so much on an ideal situation, we forget the situation on the ground. And those are some of the gaps in policies, and we'll discuss more on that. And then now finally, now the biggest I think the more technical part is now evaluating the outcomes of when you implemented these policies. Was this policy truly fit for your people who you had targeted, and did you actually get to it to meet what you had set when you were drafting this policy? And I think one key advice I'll give you with regards to progress monitoring is it's always good to keep contact with the people who drafted the policy, no matter how you do it. I think if I remember correctly, in FMSA, we used to have a working group that used to work on the policies. And then now the policy will be implemented in the federation, and then there'll be another working group to revise it in 2-3 years. It's always good to, if you can, get the contact of anyone or the leader who was coordinating that process, just for you to understand the context on why they were drafting something. I always believe learning has various components. There's a reading, there's a verbal, there's a auditory. Sometimes what you might read as a written policy and what might take you aback might not actually be what was the thought behind what they've written in a particular policy. I don't know if that makes sense. So you might see probably a policy that says you cannot call reproductive health education comprehensive sexual education because the word sexual is promotes promiscuity, and it might take you aback, but then you can have a discourse with the people who wrote that particular policy and ask what was the going behind this, and they might tell you, oh, we are aligning with probably current trends in global policy where all terms are going towards saying reproductive health and not sexual reproductive health and things like that. And it also now gives you a bit of context and a bit of historical background on how the situation was, and also just incorporates all components of learning. Yes, and then now we go to policy monitoring, again, another definition, which was now from Action Aid, still re-emphasizing that you need stakeholders. You cannot evaluate a policy alone. You need to be preferably a group of people representing diverse interests to working towards a common goal of evaluating this particular policy. Why do I say diverse interests? Because you need as many varying views as possible to enable you to accept, not only accept, but also see how other stakeholders interpret your policy. So if you're having a policy, I'll go back to reproductive health, and you've targeted NiMSA students, you can have, if possible, you can bring someone from the pharmaceutical student body to evaluate and give you their context on how reproductive health intersects with their pharmacy practice. You can get someone from faculty to tell you how teaching you OBS-GYN intersects to the policy you're writing. You can even get someone from your local area government, if it's a policy for your local member organization, to tell you how that policy you're writing for your LMO intersects with the work that is going on in the community level, either through your primary healthcare system of community health volunteers, or even just how community uptake of reproductive health policies and reproductive health policy practices are. And this slide basically just summarizes it from a quote from Action Aid. And then, of course, as you're writing your policies and as you're evaluating your policies, you have to have a guide or a framework on which you're evaluating them on. And this means that sometimes you have to go through or choose the principles that you're going to use as your guide or as your marking scheme. And these principles, these are the ones I've found that are common, but you can also look at policies that you could also pick your principles from the governing principles of NiMSA or the governing principles of your local member organization, if it's a policy for your local member organization, or even your community leadership, whichever you're doing, try and base it on the mission, vision, goals of whichever this policy has been written for, and the guiding principles of the organization that's written for it. But many a times you'll find you want your policy to be inclusive. So you want that when you're doing your progress monitoring and evaluation, and even your policy evaluation, that your policy includes as much of the stakeholder input as possible. You want to make sure that your policy has credible data and evidence. It's really embarrassing to have a policy that might have data that could be put into questionable. You can always use the data from UN, World Bank, known credible organizations whenever you're drafting your policies, because these are frameworks that have been used or have also been developed under strict peer reviews, and even known journal articles can also guide you on the same. You want policies that have a sense of ownership. I said national because this is a NiMSA training, so you'd like to draft a NiMSA policy that resonates to everyone in NiMSA. And then finally, you'd like a policy that can be able to stay for some time. It will really be sad that you sit down to draft a policy for 5-10 years, and then it doesn't stay. Apologies for the noise behind me. I have cats, and today they have decided to be noisy. And then finally, you have transparency, that you have in your process of being inclusive, having credible information, having ownership, having sustainability. The process you're doing your policy evaluation is transparent. You don't want to be in a situation where people are saying, fine, you brought certain people and not others just because they are your friends, or just because they are aligned to certain principles that and you've not included us. I think a good issue, I'll go back to reproductive health because it's always so controversial. When you're looking at a good example is the recently Roe v. Wade scenario. A lot of the controversy about this has the transparency in pulling of that motion. So things to think about. So yeah, sorry, just give me a minute. Probably Joshua, if you're on the call, you could help me with following up on the chat in case of anything. But in case of any questions from where I am so far, you could raise your hand, or you could just type them on the chat and I'll have a look at them as we go. But that's the first element of my presentation. Now we go over to evaluating, because if you're looking at monitoring, I always add evaluation, because monitoring is like you're the police, you're looking for, many a times our police never look for correct things, they look for crimes. So monitoring is you being a police looking for a fault. Evaluation is now you found the criminal and now you want to give them their sentence based on the crime that they have committed. So that's basically the two ways of looking at it. So in your evaluation, I just took the general monitoring and evaluation definition, which is gathering the information during your process of monitoring and assessing it so as now to determine whether you're going to continue the policy as is or you're going to update it to current ground. And as I said, you'll try be impartial and it has to be systematic. So you have to have an order in which and if you're looking at various ways of evaluation, you could look at it when you're starting and adjusting, drafting it. Please mute. And then all the way to now when you're doing it and you're doing your monitoring and evaluation after your policy is about to lapse. And then now your feedback when you have implemented and people are telling you, oh, this policy worked and this didn't work. So when you're looking at your types of evaluation, you can look at it in these 4 ways. The process of the evaluation or the outcome, or you can look at it at the impact of your policy or the cost benefit of the policy. So you'll go through each of them one at a go. So if you're looking at your evaluation, you can evaluate the actual process of the policy. So that policy loop that I showed you, and you look for any problems and solutions and you draft them. in each of the particular segments. That's one way you can look at it. So the policy cycle, then you evaluate each and every step. When we were writing this policy, how was the writing process? Did we incorporate as many views as we could? Was it holistic? Were we impartial? Does it fit to all the people? So that's one way of going about it. Then when you look at the adoption, when we adopted, did we manage to adopt it in our, as per our parameters? How did it go? And now as we're evaluating, how has our monitoring of this policy been? Have we been monitoring it consistently or just here and there? And will our evaluation results be actually accurate, or it will be a little bit tricky? And now generally the whole process of the policy, did the policy do what it was supposed to do, or did it fall short, and why did it fall short? Another way you could look at it is now the outcome. So in your policies, some people write their policies with a lot of targets, like I'll give an example for Kenya, because unfortunately I'm from Kenya, and that's one thing I'm more familiar with. When we hosted the ICPD 25 conference in 2019, our president said that he would like us to end early childhood marriages and female genital mutilation. And everyone was like, okay, that's a good goal, fine, tick. But the timeline he gave was what everyone was questioning, because for us, that particular problem has a lot of cultural basis. So it was now the question most people are asking is he now going to promote that we tell these people to change their culture, or how are we going to have these discussions with these communities to meet the goal that he has set in that timeline? Because as you know, in our African contexts, change of behavior and change of cultural norms takes some time, because it's things that have been passed down from generation to generation. And that is why when you're looking at outcome, many people like putting their policies to have outcome-based evaluation. So you're evaluating the intent of the policy, why you made the policy, the various elements of those policies, and the sub-indicators. If those sub-indicators have percentages, you're also evaluating them. And then if you have outcomes from your policy in terms of activities, you evaluate the good and the bad, the pros and the cons. But many a times, as you're thinking so much about outcome, and I'll say it at the last slide, it's good to have outcome-based evaluation. That is fine, I don't mind it. But as you choose this way of evaluating your policy, don't get lost in the rabbit hole, because you might end up now writing a policy of outcomes that are easy to achieve, and then you say that your policy has fulfilled what it needed to do, because you've put probably narrow targets to meet. And that's always the biggest challenge when you choose an outcome evaluation-based way of looking at policies. Or you might be so harsh on a policy because they set high targets on things to do, and possibly they've actually done good progress on the same thing, just probably not having met the policy. So let's say an example is, I'll take my example I've just used. We were told that the president wanted to end early childhood marriages and FGM. So now you could be so strict that the president didn't end it by this time, and possibly when he got into office and when he put this policy into place, the marriages ended by half, which is still a positive outcome in change. And it's something that you always have to think about, because policy evaluation and monitoring is very tricky. If you decide to be super strict and type A, that the targets must be met as they are written, then you might never get fulfillment with the policies that are written. But if you decide to have an open mind and look at, okay, given circumstances, let's say because of COVID-19 and increased lockdown and increased cases of gender-based violence, we couldn't have reached our target in our timeline of early childhood marriages for XYZ. So if they've made a progress of 20%, that is better than going 10 steps back of having more childhood marriages or more cases of FGM and things like that. And one of the things that I'd like to also emphasize is don't just look at the result, because that's an output. It is done an activity, you've trained 100 NiMSA members on policy, and you're like, your policy for policy change in SCOPI has been met because you did a training on SCOPI, on policy change. Outcomes are how that policy has impacted the population. So don't base it on an activity, more as look at the picture and how it addresses the population. Just like we say in IFMSA, thinking global but acting local. How does the policy you've written as NiMSA SCOPI affect the community that you're serving or you're addressing? So it's not more about how you reach NiMSA members, how these NiMSA members create change wherever they are in their respective fora. That's a way you can look at outcome evaluation. Otherwise, if you look at it, if you confuse your outcome evaluation with output evaluation, then you'll just be meeting targets and thinking your policy is working fantastic and you're doing well, or your policy is failing miserably and probably you're actually meeting your outcomes. It's just that probably not in the activities that you have planned out. Then the last two groups of evaluation, which are a little bit more technical and vague, but still models you can think of, is one, if you're looking at how this policy, if you're looking at, for those of you who will end up doing public policy and matters to do with government, how this policy brings to profitability or improving the economy of a nation, then a cost benefit evaluation can work for you. So like many a times you can look at environmental programs or education programs that fit into this framework. But for student policies, when you're starting out, I think the ones that you'll preferably look more towards is your process evaluation. For me, in my personal view, your process evaluation is really good model to use because it reminds you of that policy loop and you never forget it and you keep integrating it. And then for me, the impact evaluation, what change have you gotten? Like if you wanted to teach more girls on reproductive health to reduce teenage pregnancies and you've taught those girls and the teenage pregnancies have gone down, that's an impact. That's an impact that you can evaluate and use to evaluate your policies. So in my personal view, the process and the impact are the ones that look more favorable when you're evaluating policies. Result and NTK is nice to know. When you're doing your evaluation, nice things to know are, as you're doing your policy evaluation, every good thing like monitoring and evaluation also has its flip side. There are two sides of which are never identical, but it's the same at the end of the day. And one of the other sides of these coins are the barriers to effectively evaluate your policies or monitor your policies. One of them is, like I've been mentioning and I've been leading up to, is focusing so much on what has been written and the goals, and if those goals change, you now start complaining. So if you're so fixed on what's been written on that paper, you might not be able to evaluate how that policy has changed the environment in totality. And when you focus so much on goals, on measurements, on targets, how efficient it's been, how effective it's been, sometimes you lose sight of the bigger picture. You might have a policy that is 100 pages long, and they've only, if you're looking at it thoroughly, probably they've only implemented 5 pages of that policy. Those 5 pages of that policy more change environment than the 100 pages that have been written. So those are things that you really also need to be open-minded and impartial when you're looking at this policy monitoring and progress monitoring. And then, of course, like I said, it's always good to be in the shoes of those who wrote the policy. So and that is because it will also help you understand the mission or the overall aim of why are you writing this policy? How is it going to change, make an impact to this health space that you are in? Are you just writing a policy for the sake of saying, oh, NiMSA has 100 policies? Or are you writing a policy that will actually have impact in your society, even from where you are, amongst probably even your medical class, or even something as simple as the church you attend? Those are things you look about. And then now in the end, like I said, now we end up now back to this look, policy evaluation, where for you to implement your policy well, you have to keep on evaluating. It's always nice to do at least evaluations if you can, if it's a 3, as you choose your timeline of policies. I hope that was discussed. I hope it is, as you choose, let's say, for example, 3 years, each year you at least, or each year you have a sit down to look at it keenly and see, okay, we are 1/3 into this journey. Where are we at? What do we need to fast track? What do we need to improve? So that at least now, by the time you're getting to your evaluation and writing your recommendations, or writing things to maintain, or writing things to remove or amend, you are writing things based on the gathered experience along the way, and not now sitting down and thinking after 3 years, hey, what happened when we were in year 1 of the policy? So for me, mine is just to say, as you do your monitoring, as you do your policy progress monitoring, it is a progress. It is a policy is implemented over a course of time. So the more you regularly evaluate it, the better and the easier for you with regards to also when you're now thinking of things to maintain and things to include in your amendments. And with that, I think I'll leave you with my final in Wilson's law in policy. The first law is that all policy interventions in social problems produce the effect that you're looking for. And that is if the research is carried out by those implementing the policy or by their friends. But the second law also says that no policy intervention in social program produces the intended effects. So yeah, if they're carried out by third parties or those who are skeptical of the policy. So at the end of the day, I think this is mine to just drive home that stakeholder engagement, from those ones who are the advocates to those ones who are against it. You need to incorporate all their views, because at the end of the day, you will never have a policy that everyone loves. You'll have your policy will give you, just like the traffic lights, 3 types of reactions: people who are all for it, people who are all against it, and people who are just waiting to decide which side of the scale they will tip over, whether it's a red light or a green light. And that's just how policy is. So yeah, I think that was it from me.
Thank you so much, Marie Claire, for this session. It was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. So I think it's time for questions now. So if you have any question, you can raise up your hands, or you can just write it in the chat box. Thank you so much, Marie Claire.
No problem. I see Abdullahi Karimat was saying, could I show the last slide and explain again? So I don't know. I'll look for it. I don't. It's this one you're looking for. Slide before this. This one. Oh, okay. Yes, I will give my slides. I always give my slides for any training, so worry not. So here we are. You've asked about barriers. So it is barriers to effective policy evaluation. So good question. It is essentially these are the key things you're looking for, or one of the things that might limit you in your evaluation. So you might have, there are very nice policies that specify each goal of each thing you want to do, or they might say, they might update a policy, and when they update the policy, the goals might change. And many a times, if you're someone who is looking at a policy word for word, or a document word for word, you might be if I'll take the change. If a policy is updated and they have a change in probably a particular goal, you might start being skeptical on why did they change the goal? Did they find that they couldn't attain it? Why are they amending it? Does that mean the original policy was not effective? And many a times, being human, you might take it negatively on that goal change. Or you might find, you might say, the NiMSA policy NiMSA SCOPI aims to train all NiMSA members to be policy. And then when NiMSA does their policy evaluation, he reached 100 members, you guys might be like, man, why were you putting that target? That target was not specific. It was not smart. You people are aiming for the stars and you could barely even get Maram Road, such things. And you might be so skeptical on the process, but look at it in the reverse. NiMSA trained 100 people from all their membership. Yes, they wanted to train everyone, but they trained 100 people. Those 100 people for a new committee are better than 0 people. This training could only be having a SCOPI official and myself. I could be talking to one official. And I think I'll put it, half a loaf is better than none. So if you're people who, and that's unfortunately our Achilles heel being in the health space, where protocols are to be met word for word. I mean, how you treat hypertension, the protocol will only be updated by what is the current guidelines. But I mean, you'll use probably the same drugs, whether you are in Abuja, whether you're in Lagos, whether you're in Port Harcourt, wherever you are in the world, in Nigeria, your protocol for hypertension is the same. So if you use the same mentality on policies, that these people wrote this policy, it should be adopted 100%. Even when they implement 1%, you will be so, your evaluation will be so skewed on the negative scale that you might forget to see the bigger picture, that 1% can actually effect change to the whole country. And it goes the same way with the measurements, the targets. And if sometimes people write a policy on this is what should be done, and probably those things are not done, but the end goal is met, you might be so judgmental on why did we write these steps and not implement them as they should be. And that is why I said at the beginning, you should really have the principles guiding you as you evaluate your policy. So before you venture into this process, you must decide on your common overarching principles. When we are doing this evaluation, why are we doing it? Always have the answer. If you have answered your why on why you're doing this evaluation, and you know the why of why you're doing this evaluation, and you have the principles guiding you to attain this why, then these barriers are less likely to show up. Because now you'll be knowing we are evaluating this policy to see, let's say it's SCOPI, and SCOPI wrote a policy of how they want to do things for their 1 year, their first year as a committee. You'll be evaluating it saying, this is a new committee. It is supposed to meet the NiMSA mission and vision, as well as the vision and mission of the committee. And new committees have their general problems. So I should be open to accepting all these various components that are behind this policy that's been written by NiMSA SCOPI, and then you do your evaluation. If you have those principles and you've understood them, and you've understood the context of why NiMSA wrote the policy, then your barriers are less likely to occur. And that's why I even said it's very good to, if you are able to touch base with people who wrote the policy that you're reviewing, you can always touch base with them and be like, okay, we'd like to hear your if you have time, you could give us, or if it's a NiMSA policy, give us a context of why you're writing this policy, what was the background and the thought. And that way, even you might now even get principles of principles of why they wrote it, and be more guided in your evaluation. Hope that answered it. So, for how long should we wait for our policy to be acceptable to people? All right, so how long should we wait for the policy to be acceptable to people? I think it's a policy. Okay, let me answer the question in 2 ways. When you write a policy, it is one, to guide, like I said, to guide change, Sunday. So when you write a policy, one of the key things you need to also think of is the communication of this policy to be understandable to the people who will accept it. and trying to communicate this in as simple terms as possible, but acceptable to your demographic. So that's one of the things. Will you get 100% acceptability? Chances are no, but it is, I think, if you have a policies ideally to be preferably like 2 years, at least 1 year for you to now implement, see how people accept it, get your lessons, and then the second year for you to draft your amendments and your recommendations on what can be maintained, what can be removed, do you continue on, and such things. And even policies get extensions of like 6 months, 1 year, depending on your structures of your organization. So based on now when you're implementing and you see how people are accepting it, or you see, not a matter of people accepting, but do you see whether there's actual behavior change and change in your community, then that is when you will assess when to end your policy or when to do your evaluation. Sometimes even you might decide, okay, this policy was for 1 year, but we've seen it's working relatively well and there's changes in the environment of the policy, so we can give it another extension. And then now when a particular time comes, you can't keep your policy, you have to reach, there has to be a timeline you put for a revision of your policies. So and also, it's also key to note that some policies just lapse, like the time changes. Like the example I gave at the start, MDGs, the millennium ended and we had to find a new target, a new thing to talk about. And now we talked about sustainability. Now in 2030, we'll probably see what the new thing is. Are we still talking about sustainability or will it be a new thing? So policies are also allowed to lapse and end. So also key of noting. But like I said, if you understand why you're drafting this policy and who you want to target, at the end of the day, it's easier for you. It's not a matter of thinking this policy is 1 year. So in 6 months, if you don't have positive outcome, we get rid of it. No, sometimes you have to really understand what's going on and what's happening. Could be there's COVID and people are tired of and they don't really understand given that policy. Always understand why there's a negative uptake. Is it how you communicate the policy, or is it how you wrote it, or that the timing, at least the policy is a little bit. I mean, I'll give an example for Kenya. We had our Ministry of Health release 15 policy documents about a month ago, and all of us were like, okay, so which one do I start reading? And that was a problem because the policies, we take the positive outcomes that the policies have a good reason why they were released, but I have 15 policies to read. Which one do I start with? And they're all equally important. So things like that.
Thank you so much for answering your question. So I would like to chip in now. The attendance will be sent now. Some people are going for prayer, so check their attendance. I think you can.
All right. So I think I'll share the slides almost immediately with your leadership for SCOPI. But I was just curious if there are any more questions, because I really would not like to hold anyone from prayers. And also I also like to say I'm super grateful for you guys consider pushing the training. I know we pushed it quite a bit and I'm sorry about that. But if there's something you haven't understood, I'm willing to do a second training and even share some resources that help you this further.
I think you can go ahead. There's some questions. We are left with. There's some questions in the chat.
So we have a what should be considered to decide the type of evaluation process or adopt or make use of? That's a good question, a very, very good question. So I'll put it this way. When you look, because policy, there is the health policy, which is what we are mainly engaged with, but some of us might end up taking part in public policy, which is looking at government and all the things they write and if they are meeting those targets. And then that's when you'll think more on cost and budget of the policy and stuff like that. But I think for me, it's always how you write a policy is always standard. It always goes back to this loop. So, and many a times, all the things we're telling you about of the types of evaluation stem from this loop. It's just that the 4 examples I've told you of how you can evaluate a policy have been taken from how people evaluate the various policies that are available worldwide. So if you're to look at policy evaluation, at the end of the day, it all falls in this loop. How did you make your policy? How did you adopt your policy? How did you implement it? As you are doing your monitoring of the policy, what steps did you use and what are your key outcomes of this process? And then now, what do you decide to keep, change? Do you decide the policy has ended and make a new one and stuff like that? So at the end of the day, this is your common loop. And if you are to pick any of the cycles of evaluation, then you will pick your process, the process of that policy, because that's the simplest way to evaluate your policies, especially when you're starting out. But if you decide to venture into this world of policy, advocacy, and even public policy in that other realm, then you can decide to look at the specific things of like the outcomes of when you write, because you see policies also have their various complexities. So some policies will have goals and indicators, and you'd want to have a look at that and see if they are meeting that. And you can even form like a good way of probably making this easier to reflect on is if you look, I'll try and look for policy, especially the UNFPA ones are very good with putting indicators and goals. If you look at those policies and you look at the percentages or the timelines they put of meeting certain things, and you decide to have a policy commission to follow up how UNFPA is meeting their targets for, let's say, ending early childhood marriages worldwide with a focus on Nigeria, then that's now when you think of doing an outcome evaluation. If you decide to do an activity like teaching people on that UNFPA policy, and then seeing from the people you taught whether they were able to properly evaluate that policy, then that's something worth considering. And I'm trying to match the answer with the one on you've not gotten the groups. But then now, if you have now an NiMSA policy you've drafted, or even that UNFPA one, example of ending early childhood marriages, and then you say NiMSA SCOPI in conjunction with SCORA have decided to train 100 people to try and meet the UNFPA targets as the policy of UNFPA on childhood marriages has drafted. And the goals that have been put are 1, 2, 3, and the policy objectives from UNFPA are 1, 2, 3. Our aim is to end childhood marriages by 10% in this particular way, and we want to ensure we have saved 1,000 girls. So if you make that impact of saving 1,000 girls, then that's your impact evaluation. The problem with impact evaluation, it's very theoretical. It's taking what's been written to paper and saying, okay, we said we want to end childhood marriages. We've done it by saving 1,000 girls from childhood. Yeah, we have done our part to try and end childhood marriage. So it's using a lot of theory and a lot of assumptions. And that's why these 2 pillars of evaluation are a little bit more technical, because it's more theory-based and projection-based, if I was to use the term. Same way, if you look at public policy, how has childhood marriages been good for the economy? more girls got into school, meaning there was less money used in treating probably gender-based violence-related costs. You see, all those things are using a lot of assumptions and projections. It's not things that probably you'll find in paper like your outcome, where UNFPA has said end childhood marriage by 2030, for example, and then you go and you look and you're like, okay, for the Nigeria context, we are at 50% elimination. What can NiMSA do to get to possibly 60%? Things like that. So I hope that context to the answer.
But I think that the person, I don't know, the person hasn't responded yet.
Fatimat, who asked, and Mimo Waziri. So I don't know if you're still on the call, but yes, I see the recording is being, the session is being recorded. So I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right, fantastic. Any other question? Because I've perused through all the questions and I don't see any new one. I hope we've been able to sign attendance, because I know that's been, I think, the biggest concern. Kelvin. Yes, it's you are right. Impact and cost benefit use a lot of projections to help in evaluating those policies. So, like I said, it's not like your policy evaluation where you're looking at the loop and saying, okay, if it's an NiMSA-based policy which you've written, you sat down and you followed the policy loop and you've written your policy and you're looking at each of those steps. You see, that's a different ball game, as opposed to, let's say you're evaluating a national policy and you're looking at those indicators and the like and seeing its impacts. So yes, outcome means what has come out of the policy that has been drafted. Many a times it's been written in the policy with those indicators, while impact looks at the ripple effect that that policy has impacted, if that makes it easier for you. So not specific, you won't find a policy saying impact shall be XYZ, but a policy might cause an impact, if that makes it easier for Sopade's follow-up question. If a policy works, is it kept or done away with? If a policy works, you can keep it, but like I said, when you keep a policy, you need to evaluate whether that policy is in line with what is happening at that time. So always have that in mind, and that is why they say policy revision. You decide, as you decide on how long you're reviewing your policies or when your policies are updated, kindly make sure that the policies are within that time. You don't want to have a policy you wrote in 1999 that is still being used today because you kept it and you've never revised it. So like I said, for policy, how it ends, you can either keep it and revise it depending on the time, or two, you can let it just expire if the time has expired on that particular policy. And sometimes even some policies bring up other policies. A good example is the context of climate change. Many people who wrote policies on climate change generally are now revising their policies or writing new additional policies on the various components on climate change and reproductive health, climate change and one health or one planetary health, and things like that. So, like I said, as you're deciding on your policy when you're writing your policy, you need to decide when it's going to lapse. And when you're evaluating your policy, you need to decide at what points are you going to be evaluating this policy. When the policy has addressed the problem statement, is it necessary to still keep it? Yes, you keep it for posterity and for records purposes. So never do away with your policies. You should always have a place where your policies are stored. I'll give a very good example. NiMSA, I think, has a good database of all the policies. By the time I was finishing medical school in 2018, they had policies all the way till which you could see from 2010. So it's always good to have those policies stored somewhere so that you can have a look. You might want to pick a few ideas from an old policy when you're writing your new one, but it does not mean by having it, you're still applying it. No. Yeah, I think that's it from me. Probably Joshua and the team could address the attendance issue that some of us are facing, but from my end, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Marie Claire. Any person having an issue should contact the person in charge, will be sent later on. So you can contact him for any issue. Thank you so much, Marie Claire, for the session. I think there won't be any question now. We are past time. So we really appreciate you accepting our invitation for today. It's really a privilege having you here, Marie Claire. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thank you. I think like I shared with Philemon and the whole SCOPI team, I think NiMSA has done an amazing job having this particular committee. Continue instilling the skills, but aside from just instilling the skills, apply them. I think a good example to probably make this come home easily is take any global policy or national policy and have a look at it and see what I was talking about, indicators, and think, okay, how has this policy impacted what I'm seeing in my hospital or in my community? And probably then it's when some of these things will become more and more easy. Or when you see a policy, ask yourself, what was the process when they were writing it or revising it? And it will come back home that much easier. Like I gave that warning at the start, this was going to be a lot of technicalities, but if you sit down and try and apply them, then it will come back more easier to apply. I'll probably liaise with Joshua to see how we can do it in the context of Nigerian policies. But like I'll give my example for Kenya. We've launched our reproductive health policy now for the next 10 years, and we had a policy for the last 10 years. So like for myself, I am also in this process of progress monitoring and evaluation to see what has changed in the new policy to also help me continue sharpen my skills. And you're free to also evaluate the policies for Kenya on the same, or if you have the same context for Nigeria, you can start off with that. But from my end, have fun writing your policies. And you like evaluating, have fun evaluating. Policy life is very interesting and very intriguing, and it intersects with everyone, whether you're a surgeon or whether you become a health entrepreneur somewhere. So do enjoy your evening and prayers.
Wow, thank you so much, Marie Claire, for the advice and the opportunity. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really inspiring. Thank you. So I think we have come to the end of this session. So, and as I stated earlier, I've sent emails to all those that submitted their documents. Review will start this week. So you should check the Google documents. They'll be making comments throughout this week, so you can be seeing the comments and be making review where possible. You will actually have time after this week. You will just basically see the comments this week. Then next week you can start the work, because you'll be given like 1 week to start the major work. But you can just use this week to be seeing all the comments that will be made, so that by next week you can start putting in all the corrections that you're supposed to do before the final submission. And also concerning your presentation, the guideline will be sent to you next and this week, sorry, not this week. So every group can start making preparations for their presentation. So thank you everyone for coming to today's session. And thank you, Marie Claire, for accepting our invitation. And for this very inspiring session, we are very grateful. Thank you everyone for coming. So our next session will be on Saturday. We'll be talking about communication skills. So, and thank everyone for coming. And also for the attendance, 1 minute. So please ensure that you sign out, please. By 7:10, I think it will be shared close. I don't know what time will be. Okay, it's not actually here, so he might. 10 supposed to be closed, so ensure to fill your form. Good night, everyone.